All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream here. Let's get started. Um, my name is Bluehand Coding. My name is Replit. I go by Bluehand Coding on TikTok, and I am one of your Replit reps. So this right here is my monthly event for November. So let me actually switch over to the main screen. As you guys have probably seen from all the promotional material that's gone out, we're working with esoteric languages. So for those of you who don't know, esoteric languages are languages that aren't really meant to be for development. They're really just meant to sort of make you think in a different way. They push the boundary on what a language can do syntactically. So I figured it'd be fun to have an event where we sort of challenge ourselves to work with these languages that are meant to be difficult. So again, we're working with LOLCODE in this case. Hello, everybody. Yeah. So again, I'll give you a sort of an overview of what we're going to be doing. First things first, we'll go over the syntax of LOLCODE, break it down into some pieces. We'll do print statements, conditional logic, stuff like that, taking user input. And then we'll build some really simple projects like FizzBuzz and the Fibonacci sequence to sort of get some practice, sort of overcome the challenges that the syntax gives us. So I'm going to come over here to Replit, again, replit.com. And actually, let me zoom this in a little bit so it's easier to see. And Replit is actually really awesome because they have a template for LOLCODE. So we can go ahead and get started without much hassle. So we'll come over here to create in the top left. Our template, again, is going to be LOLCODE. And we'll just call this, we'll say LOLCODE stream, or let's call it LOLCODE lesson, if you will. So again, if I do look over here, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I'm covering everything. I'm not missing anything. So yeah, as I said earlier, esoteric languages are also called ESO-langs, E-S-O-L-A-N-G, and they're languages that are made as a joke, as I said, to sort of push the boundary in terms of what a programming language can do in the syntactical level. It's not like Python or Java. You're not going to use it to actually make anything that goes out into the world. It's mostly for challenging yourself. So again, LOLCODE is the language we're working with today. And actually, let me zoom this in a little bit more. Close this. And the thing about LOLCODE that makes it so special, so unique, is that it uses 2000s internet slang and this very informal text. So K thanks bye, visible hey world. This is all stuff from the 2000s internet era, which has sort of been put into this programming language. So we've gone ahead and opened up our REPL. And the first things first, we can take a look at this sort of example boilerplate code, which Replit has provided for us. So actually, if we go ahead and run this, we see we get hey world. So that's this output right here. Now, the other three lines, so line 1, we have hey 1.2. What this is actually telling us is that the LOLCODE program has started, and we're going to be using version 1.2 of the interpreter to run it. And at the end, every LOLCODE program has to end with K thanks bye, in all uppercase, just so it knows that it has come to the end of its execution. And then on line 2 here, Ken has stdio. Our stdio is sort of like an import statement. Normally how we import like a certain library in Python or Java or whatever. Can have stdio is just saying import the standard input output. So standard input output is what lets us, print stuff, take input, all that jazz. So let's actually clear this off and start from the very, very basics. Again, there's plenty of examples that we could look at, but let's start with our total basics. And the first thing that you usually want to learn when you're learning to code is how to write a comment. Usually in Python, it's like hashtag or if you're in the other languages, there's like the forward slash, the double forward slash. Well, with LOLCODE, it actually uses by the way. So again, if I wanted in Python to leave a comment, I'd say hashtag this is a comment. The equivalent to that in LOLCODE is where you say, by the way, this is a comment. So BTW, by the way, is your comment syntax. And if I run this, again, you don't see the hey, but you're not getting any error because of this. We'll leave that there. And let me clear this. There we go. The next step with a LOLCODE program is, as we saw in the example, is you have to have a hey, to have a k thanks bye. So the hey, you have to put the version. So with this tutorial, with this workshop, whatever you want to call it, we'll be working with LOLCODE 1.2. So if I run this now, again, no errors. So our comment is not throwing an error. We have the sort of general body structure of our LOLCODE program, so we know everything is working. So as we're working, let me leave some comments on what everything does. Ooh, I put my hashtag from habit. By the way, this is what starts the program. 2 is the version number. And by the way, this is what ends the program. We've got our sort of general body, how our LOLCODE program has to be structured. We've learned how to add comments. The next thing we need to do is to print something out. Print statements are the traditional way of getting started. Again, first things first, we have to import our standard input output in order to like push something out to the console to take input. So that input looks something like can has stdio. So this is how LOLCODE is importing code. So say, by the way, this is me importing the standard IO output library. And actually, let me comment these a little in too, so it doesn't get too confusing. So we have our structure. We have, the ability to print something out. Now we need to make that actually happen. So what we're going to say is visible. So this is sort of like calling a print function, if you will. Visible. I hope this works. If we run this, what we should hopefully ideally see is in our console, this string that we've passed in will get printed. Oops. Ta-da. I hope it works. And if we try it with something else like LOLCODE rocks, that works as well. So that's how we're able to print stuff out using LOLCODE. And again, sort of imagine if this is like your first time looking at LOLCODE. The syntax is like, right now it's messing with me, having these by the ways right here, and then having this entire chunk of weird 2000 slang on the other hand. So we'll just make this hello world instead. So that is us adding a print. It is very cool, yeah. But it's also like really, really trippy to work with. So next is we should learn how to store a variable. Again, with Python and most languages, it's really simple. If you had like your var keyword, your const keyword, the name of the variable, and you say equal to whatever. With LOLCODE, it is I has a var, it's hello world. So let me break this down for you guys. This statement right here is basically me saying, again, in Python, var equals hello world. That's what this is saying, essentially. So I has a var. So this is the name of our variable. We're going to call it var just for the sake of, actually, let's make it look something, let's call it, that has a message. it's hello world. So this is basically what I've done. Message is equal to hello world. So if I come down here to our print statement, our visible, if you will, if I say visible message, we should see hello world in all caps printed out to our console. Boom. Check that. So I'll give you guys a second to sort of catch up, add any comments if you guys need to. And then we'll continue. The assembly language, I couldn't tell you. I'm not familiar with the assembly language and where it is on Replit. But hopefully, we'll see. Because we have a lot of languages here on Replit, but I'm not sure about assembly. So anyway, what have we done so far? We have figured out how to structure our LOLCODE program with hey and k thanks bye. We've learned how to import the standard input-output library so we can print stuff out, take input. We've learned how to create a variable, I has a, our variable name, and then the variable itself. And then finally, we know how to print out variables or strings or whatever. And just to show you guys, I can get rid of that message. We can also print stuff like numbers as well. It all works just fine, your integers and whatnot. So with that whole discussion on integers and all that, oh, it looks like there's a template for assembly. Perfect, perfect. So with our whole discussion on integers and strings and whatnot, which is what we call them, LOLCODE actually has their own name for certain types of data types. So I think that's our next sort of thing to talk about. So again, I'm going to create a bunch of different variables, and we're going to talk about what data type they're actually called in LOLCODE. So let's say I has a string, it's I. This is typically what we would call a string, right? Let's copy this. Oops. I has a int, it's 9. This is what we'd call an integer, right? I has a float, it's, we'll say 4.5 or 4.3. We have I has a bool, it's win. So actually, in LOLCODE, there is no such thing as true or false. I'm pretty sure it's just win or lose. So that's your Boolean. So strings in LOLCODE are actually called yarn. Hopefully it's not lost on you, string, yarn, cat for the logo. Ints in LOLCODE are called number, like that. Floats are called numbar, and then your Boolean values are called truth. Again, these should actually all be capitalized. Bar, truth. So like we started off and it was pretty confusing, but now this is just totally, completely different from what we as like normal programmers are used to. So that's sort of your general overview of your data types. And again, we'll touch back on this a little bit later on. But now I actually want to go ahead. I'll clear this off. Again, we'll look at this again later on. Now I want to look at accepting user input. So the first thing that we have to do is sort of declare a variable where our user input is going to get saved to. So again, that's very simple. We have I has a, let's say, name. Again, this is just me declaring a variable. I'm not assigning it a value. It's just a declaration. So again, before we had it's Varun, but that's me declaring a variable and assigning it a value. We just want to declare a variable. So I has a name. If I say give me name, this line of code right here is actually going to take input from our console, and then we can do visible name to make sure that it shows up. Save that. If we run this, nothing is run here. So I can type in Varun. You can see that that gets printed right back out to me. So another cool way of taking input from our user. So actually, let me comment this out. Line 5, I has a name. We're declaring the variable to save user input. Our user input is going to get saved to that name variable. We're going to then accept user data, input rather, and then we're going to print out what the user typed in. And just so you guys know, just like how in Python, when you have your import statements, your input brings it in as a string, or in this case, as a yarn. So again, I know it's getting kind of confusing, but just to reiterate, declaring a variable, that variable is going to have the input that we get from the user saved to it, which is as a yarn or a string. And then we're going to simply print that out to our console. So let's say instead of name, we had age. I has a age, give me age, visible age. Run this right now. Everything should work perfectly fine, right? 17, no errors, no issues. What if I wanted to do some math on this? So let's talk about how to do math with LOLCODE. So what I'll say is visible, we're just going to print out a sum. Sum of age and 1. So I'm just going to add 1 to my age. This is just me saying age, my age variable, which is 17, which is what I'll type in, plus 1. If I run this, I'll type in 17. It works just fine, which is actually odd because I thought you had to cast, but I think it did it automatically. So we're okay for now. This is something they'll have to deal with later on, though. But yeah, that is us doing a little bit of math with the input which the user has brought in. So now that we've sort of touched on math, let's actually expand on it. Let's do our basic sort of mathematical operations. So we have adding, we have diff, so that's our difference. Saying, by the way, age minus 1, if we run this again, 18. So we have 18 right here, which is that. And then we have 16 right there, which is this. So that is how we're able to do very basic mathematical operations with LOLCODE. Now we'll talk about multiplication and division, which, this is pretty straightforward, but the spelling that they use on multiplication and division is really, really confusing. So again, we'll have our visible, just our print statement. We'll say product. Please make note of the spelling product of age and 2. So again, this is just me saying, let me comment these in a little bit more as well. This is just saying age, which is going to be 17 times 2. So hopefully 34. Run it. I'll type in 17. Boom, 34 right here. So we have our 18 from adding it, we have our 16 from subtracting 1, and then we have our 34 from multiplying 2. And then our last one, we have 2 more that I want to talk about. We have division, right? So division has a really weird spelling, just like multiplication, just like product. So it's going to be quotient, quotient, quotient of age and 17. Again, this is just me saying, by the way, age 17 divided by 17. That should hopefully give us 1. Test it out. Oops, not 117. There you go. So 1. So everything is working perfectly fine. I mean, it's working great. This divides equally. So let's say we put something like 2. What do we get then? We get, oops, it should be 2 right here. 17. So we get 8. So it automatically casts it to an integer, to a number. Because if you do 17 divided by 2, that is 18.5. But as an integer, it becomes 8. So just make note of that. I mean, I doubt anyone here will actually be using LOLCODE to make any serious programs. But if you end up doing that, that's something that is very important to consider. And finally, the last mathematical operator I want to talk about is your modulus operator, which is really good if you want to see if like a number is like an odd number, an even number, or if a certain number is a factor of another number. So we'll say mod of age, and we'll do 17 and 17. So 17 is a factor of 17, which means that our modulus should hopefully return 0. That's our modulus operator that we typically see. On this, type in 17. And yep, as you can see, we get 0, because if you divide 17 into 17, you have no remainder. The remainder is 0. So that is how we do very basic mathematical operations with LOLCODE. So again, we are taking an input. Again, we're declaring the variable. That variable has our input saved to it. And then we're able to reference that variable, right, age, throughout our program to perform mathematical functions on it. Now, the next couple things I want to talk about. Hold up. Okay. Are we going to talk about our comparison operators? And this one I won't go too deep into. It's nothing crazy. But it's pretty important if you want to be able to write if statements and stuff like that, So our comparison operator is just like how in our normal languages we have, and, or, not, stuff like that. We'll just be looking at and or. Nothing too crazy. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is if two things are equivalent to each other. Actually, comparison operators aren't and or, sorry. There are things like your comparison operator if one is bigger than the other. That's what I meant. So let's see how we can test for double equal sign to make sure two things are equivalent. So say that you'd say both same age, which we'll type in 17 and 17. So this should print out like a Boolean value, if you will. So I'll type in 17. Now we're getting that error. Cannot cast Boolean to string value. Oh, oops. I know it's wrong. So this returns a Boolean, but then in order to print it out, it has to be a string. So what we'll do is we need to have a variable. We'll say I has a, let's say, age. We'll call it age is 17. Okay. It's both same. So what we're saying is we're basically having a variable that's going to store a Boolean value. That Boolean value is going to come from this comparison where we're going to see is our age variable equivalent to 17, which is what we'll type in. So then we're going to say visible age is 17. So let's try that now. Type in 17. Oops, I think I messed up again. So what we'll now say is age is 17 is now a yarn. Let's try that. Hmm. 17 is now a yarn. I'm trying to think what I've done wrong here, because what I've done is I've essentially have a Boolean value. We know it's a Boolean. We're having an issue with printing it out. I tried converting it into a string. This is how you do casting with LOLCODE. So I'm going to assume that something is just not working. This is odd. And honestly, see if a different version makes a difference. And LOLCODE is so trippy, so I don't even know if I'm remembering the right thing. Huh. I guess we're gonna have to skip over that because I'm not sure what is the error here. But that's okay. I mean, it is a confusing language. It's meant to be confusing, but I'm not going to pull up any of the documentation right now to sort of hash this out. But you sort of see the logic, if you will. As long as the logic sticks with you guys, then it's okay. But this is something that I can't sort of grapple with right now. And I think the last thing I want to talk to you guys about before we sort of go into building our, actually, never mind, I take it back. We need to look at our conditionals. Sorry. Conditional. So that's just our if statements and stuff. And again, we're going to be doing something very, very simple with this. Building off the same thing we were talking about earlier, we're just going to say if our age, and 17, if that's the same, oh, really? This is basically saying, hey, if my age is equivalent to 17, is that true? If it is, yeah, really, then we're going to print visible age var is 17. That's the only 6 people watching. Yeah. Replit events don't really get that much attention. I mean, we on our own as reps, we do our own sort of promotional stuff, but it's okay. I mean, it's out there, so people watch later on. I mean, if they can't make it to the live stream anyway, so it's not sad. Okay. So again, just to reiterate, we're doing an if statement here to check if our age variable is 17, which is what I'll type in. If it is, we're going to print age var is 17. If it's not true, no way, we're going to print age var is not 17. Let's try this. Hopefully the error that we had earlier doesn't sort of kick in again. Oops. Oh, and sorry about that. This if block, if you will, has to end with an OIC at the end. There you go. If we run this, we'll type in 17. Age var is not 17. So if I see, again, this is a yarn. We're taking this in as a yarn. We're comparing it to an integer. So if I change this to this, it should work. There we go. So it's just a different data type issue. So if I type in something like 16 now, age var is not 16. If I type in 17 again, age var is 17. So we're just checking to see equality. We're just comparing to, this string right here, this yarn, and then whatever our age variable has. So yeah, that is how we do very simple conditionals. And again, this is just like an if statement. We're not really digging down into else ifs and stuff like that, because then it gets really syntactically confusing, at least for me. So with that in mind, I think the last thing I want to talk about before we build our little projects are for loops. Not while loops, just for loops. I'm being very selective with what I've chosen to teach, because there's a lot, and I just sort of want to cultivate a general interest, not necessarily dive and spend the whole hour I have with you guys on syntax. Because again, that's sort of a thing that you have to repeat over and over to get it down. So let me just check my notes really quickly. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a limit. Sorry. So we're going to say I has a limit. It's 10. So we're going to have our loop run for 10 goes. Okay. And now what we're going to say is I'm in your loop up in I till both same I and limit. And again, I'll type it all out. I know it's confusing, but then I'll go back and explain. Our loops will also end with I'm outta your loop. And now between them, what I'm going to do is say visible I. Again, just bear with me here. I'm just creating our general structure. We'll look at what it's doing, and then we can go back and touch upon the actual syntax itself. So I run this. Oops. Expected YR at loop. I'm in your loop, up in your, oh, there it is. I'm in your loop, up in your I, till both same I and limit. There we go. So we have 0 all the way up until 9. So let's talk about what, what is going on here. So I'm in your loop. That's sort of just saying like the for keyword. And we can actually call this whatever we want to. I'm in your loopy. It's just the name of the loop itself. Actually, I lied. It is not. So we say I'm in your loop. So this is like saying the for keyword, if you will, in Python. Up in, that is how you increment. So that's sort of like your double equal sign if you have like a var or whatever. So I'm in your loop, up in your I. So usually when you create a for loop, you have for I in whatever, for int I equals 0, I plus plus, I is less than 10. So I'm in your loop is like this for keyword. Up in is how we're incrementing. Your I is me basically saying this thing. I have an I that is starting off at 0, your I, till both are the same I and limit. That's basically saying till I'm going to increment my I up until the point where it is 10, which is basically the same thing as saying I is less than 10. And again, if you have this sort of for loop structure, you get the same output as we've gotten down here. Oh my God, LOLCODE. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So that is our for loop. So far what we've talked about is the project structure, how to leave comments, creating variables, casting variables to different data types. We talked about our data types, our importing our standard input-output headers, loops, very basic conditionals, very basic comparison operators. Again, if you guys do enjoy that sort of taste of the language, it's not the full language, it's taste. I do encourage you guys to look it up. There's a lot of resources online. Replit has some examples that you can also take a look at. But I think we've sort of come to, oh, you can change it. Yeah, so it's loopy, and then I'm out of your loopy. There you go. Okay, I missed that. I think I'm just going to leave it for loop, though. This is already as confusing as it is. I'll leave it as loop, just for the sake of my mind not being blown. But that's our sort of syntax. Now, let's build some simple projects. Disclaimer, the code for these will not be very well optimized, but that's not the point. The point is to sort of just have something. But yeah, it won't look super duper clean or it won't be super duper optimized. But the first project I want to do with you guys is actually the Fibonacci sequence of numbers. And we're not going to be doing this recursively. We're going to be using a for loop, FYI. The first thing we're going to do is talk about what we're building. We're going to build this program will print out n terms in the Fibonacci sequence. And for those of you who don't know, the Fibonacci sequence starts like this: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 35, so on and so forth. So the pattern is that the number, let's say this 1 right here, it's the sum of the two numbers before it, the 0 and the 1. So this 2 is the sum of the numbers before it, the 1 and the 1. This 3 is the sum of this 2 and the 1. This 5 is the sum of the 3 and the 2. 8 is the sum of 5 and 3, so on and so forth. So you guys can sort of see the pattern there. So that is what our code we're going to try to do. So let's get started with our general project structure. We all know that our LOLCODE programs start with hey, and they end with k, thanks, bye. Running this, we have no errors. That means we're still doing good. We'll import our standard input-output library, our headers for that. So can has stdio, a question mark there. Run this again, all good. As you can see from the prompt, we want to print out n terms in the Fibonacci sequence. So I think the first thing we need to do is give our user, whoever's running this program, a prompt to type in the number of terms they want to generate. So we'll say visible, right? Just like our print statement, visible, enter the number of terms you want to generate, like so. And if we run this, works perfectly fine. Now what we need to do is somewhere to save that, right? Save that input. So I'll declare a variable. I'll say I has a n terms. We'll call it n terms. Give me n terms. So again, we're declaring the variable where the number that our user input will get stored, and then we're actually saving that to that variable. And we're going to call it n terms, just like this. Actually, we'll just call it n. Has n. Give me n. So then if we do visible n, we should hopefully, we'll type something in, and then we should get that same thing that we typed in back out. So enter the number of terms. We'll say we want to do 21 terms, and we get 21 right back with us. Now, what we know from earlier is that give me returns a yarn, so a string. We want this to be, again, we'll be doing a loop, so we want this to be an integer, or in LOLCODE, it's called a number. So we'll say n is now a number. Say this is actually a string, just so we don't get confused. By the way, converting n into a number. Oops. All right, it's so weird typing like these words. Integer. All right, so that's where we're at right now. We have our starting and ending point for our program. Standard input output. We're going to ask the user, how many terms do you want to generate? We're going to save that input to this variable n, which will be a yarn or a string. And then we'll convert it into a number or an integer so that we can start iterating. Are there actual use cases for LOLCODE, or is it just for fun? Well, it's sort of like, are there any useful cases for esoteric languages in general? And frankly, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. These are all meant to, as I said earlier, they're just meant to challenge you, just meant to sort of get you thinking differently about different ways. I know there's like, this is sort of off topic, but I know there's esoteric languages out there where it's all white space. So your entire program is written with tabs, spaces, and stuff like that, which is actually insane. I know there's other languages where it's all like plus equal, and there's like brackets. Again, it's just challenge you in how you approach these problems, how you think about them. Because again, the syntax is what, at this point, for these esoteric languages, is what becomes the limiting factor. So next thing I want to do is we're going to create 3 variables. And if you guys aren't familiar with the way that that Fibonacci can be done with a for loop, I'll talk about it, but just stick with me here for a sec. We're going to say I has a, it's 0. I has a B, it's 1. Then we'll say I has a C, it's sum of A and B. So if we go back, let me actually bring our example down here. So you'll see 0 is right here, 1 is right here, and I define C as the sum of A and B, which would give me my third term. So what we're basically doing is we're going to shift our variables, if that makes sense, on every iteration. So again, this is my A right now. This is my B right now. And this is my C right now, right? That's my A plus B. In order for my C to shift, I have to move my B to my C, right? And then my A to my B. Now if I add these two up, right, I get my C. I'll show you guys one more time. So if I want to get this 3, right, this B needs to become 2. A needs to become this 1. And then if I sum those up, I get my new C value. So it's sort of like we have our ABC and we're just sort of shifting them along our entire Fibonacci sequence. That's what we're doing right here. We're defining our starting point, right? Because you have to have somewhere to start in order to start adding them up and creating the sequence. So A is our 0, B is our this 1, and then C is this term. So we have our first 3 terms so far. So I'll actually go ahead and say visible A, visible B, visible C. And if I run that, we have, I guess this is our first 3 terms of our sequence. Just to separate it from our user input, right? Because we have our user input here. I'll just put visible divider, if you will. So we can drag this over to the side. There we go. That looks a little bit nicer. Let me zoom out a little bit as well. Okay. This should make it a little bit easier to see, but let me know if my camera box gets in the way, please. So just to run it one more time, we're going to enter the amount of terms we want to generate, which is, we'll say 5. And we have our first 3 already. That's just these 3. So now we need to sort of commence our loop. We'll be doing that ABC shift. So we'll say, I'm in your loop, in your I, till both same I, and actually we'll call this uppercase just for the sake of consistency with the language. I and N. And then we'll say, I'm out of your loop. Again, what am I doing? I'm going to loop this enough times where I get N terms. So it's just going to be like for int I equals 0. We're going to increment our I value up until I is equal to N, which is this user input, because that's the amount of terms that they want us to generate. All right. Now, what we'll say is, as I said with you guys earlier, we're going to do a shift, right? We have A right here, B right here, C right here, right? A is our 0, B is our 1, C is that. What I need to do is, in order to get the next C term, I need to basically do a shift, where now this will become my A, oops, this will become my B, and then I can have my new C. Does that make sense so far, what I'm doing right here with the Fibonacci sequence? I just want to make sure we have that sort of figured out before I move on. Just to make sure we're all on the same base on the actual logic. Not necessarily the syntax, but the logic. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to assume that we're all good. But again, if any sort of issues pop up, do stop me. I'll go back and sort of touch them. Now, what we're going to do, since we have our logic figured out, we're just reassigning our variables, right? Now, in order to do variable reassignment with LOLCODE, it's very straightforward. So I have my ABC. I'll say A, R, B, B, R, C, C, R, sum of A and B, and then visible C. So let me touch over what I've done here. Now, this is right here, this is where we've done our shift. So let's sort of talk this through as the loop is running. I have ABC. We know A is going to be 0. We know B is 1. And we know C is going to be 1 as well, because again, 0 plus 1. So this is where all the numbers are currently standing, 0, 1, 1, A, B, C. Now, what I'm saying is that my A is now equal to my B. So this A, which was originally 0, is now equal to my B, which makes it 1. My B is now equal to my C. So my B was right here originally, and my C was right here. But now my B takes this spot. So my A and B have shifted. And now I'm going to say C is where I just add up these two. So I do 1 and 1, I get my 2. If we take this down another level, we'll say, we're going to reiterate over our loop. We're going to say our A is now our B. Boom. Our B is now our C. Boom. And then our C is now the sum of A and B, which is 1 plus 2, 3. So that's how we're sort of doing the Fibonacci sequence iteratively with a for loop. And again, I'll leave this here in case anyone has any questions. I can always touch back on that example. So we have our C, and now basically every time we calculate our new C, we're going to print it out. So let's run this. Oops. Expected expression at A. Let's see, what's the error? Oh, sorry, these should all be commented because they're just out here. I'm just going to get rid of them. We run this now. Expected end of expression at till. Let's see. Till both say I'm in your loop. Up in your I. Till, oh, should be 1L. Oh, geez. Looks like we missed something else again. Expected end of expression at N. And till both same, I. Oh, it should be an. Okay, now we can run it. As you can see, there in like one line of code, I had like spelling, like very minor spelling errors, and they just broke the whole code. So let's say we want to do 4 terms for that. So we have our original 3, and then we generated 4 additional to that. So we have 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, and then we have 8. The only issue is that our user wanted us to have 4 terms, but we've given them 7 because we already start with 3. So what we can say is our n, we can just do n minus 3. So we can just do diff of n and 3. So we get rid of those 3 additional terms that we've already generated. So now if I run this, let's say we want to do 4 terms, we actually get 4 terms. If I want to do, let's say 10 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm actually getting 10 terms. Let's push this to the limit. Let's put like 1,000. Dang. I think it's breaking a little because I'm seeing negatives and stuff. So I think LOLCODE itself might have some limitations, but it works. I mean, to a certain extent, it's working just fine. So yeah, that is our Fibonacci sequence coded with LOLCODE. And again, let's sort of touch over our structure one more time to just sort of solidify everything that we've touched in this workshop. So again, this is how you leave comments. You put by the way, all caps. Your programs start with high, and the version of the compiler, I'm assuming. I think it's a compiler, not an interpreter. Yeah, it's definitely a compiler. And then you have k thinks by to end it. Importing your standard input-output library is done with can-has stdio. This is how you do a print statement. This is declaring a variable, taking input, and then saving it to said declared variable. This is how you cast it to a different data type, because again, we're getting our n as a string, but in order to do our loop, in order to do math on it and all that stuff, it has to be a number or an integer. Finally, we're doing variable declaration and assignment all in one line of code. We're doing a little bit of math right here and right here. This is just a plus b. This is n minus 3. And this is our general loop structure. This is like our loop for keyword, if you will. This is us incrementing our I variable until our I is equal to n minus 3. And then while we do that, we're just shifting our variables using variable reassignment to create our Fibonacci sequence of numbers. And again, if I run it one more time, you can see it works splendidly. Definitely a challenge to implement this with LOLCODE, but I think it was pretty fun. I don't think we have enough time to do another project. We're already sort of nearing the 52-minute mark, and it took us a while to do this. So I think we've come to the end of this stream. Are there any lingering questions, anything like that? I'll open the floor to any questions if we have any. But I don't think we will. In any case, if anyone is watching this in the future, I'll be sure to edit the description of the YouTube video so that you can have the link. And actually, let me go ahead and post this into chat right now so you can still access it. Should be public, so you guys can check that out, try it out. Again, I've put it up on the screen here as well. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for showing up. Thank you guys for asking questions, all that stuff. Hopefully, if you enjoyed LOLCODE or LOLCAT, you guys will do some more research, make some cool projects. Of course, I'd love to see them. You can definitely share them with me. But it has been an absolute pleasure doing this coding workshop here with you guys. And yeah, this was like my third event. So I mean, it's really fun. But yeah, I don't think we have any questions. I'm not seeing anything. So I'm going to go ahead and end our stream here. Cool language. Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. So do give it a look at. It's pretty confusing, but I think it's worth it, for the mental challenge. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I hope to see you guys in my next Replit event, which will be in December. Yeah. So yeah, take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys next time.